In the 19th century, death came from the water you drank. It struck without warning. A healthy person in the morning could be a corpse by nightfall. The cramps would come first, then the vomiting, then the unstoppable flood that drained the body of all its fluids. Doctors watched helplessly as patients shriveled before their eyes. There was no cure. There was barely any understanding. This was the age of cholera, and it would terrorize the world for an entire century. 7 global pandemics, tens of millions dead, and a mystery that would take decades to solve. Cholera did not discriminate. It killed rich and poor, young and old, but it killed the poor in far greater numbers. To understand how cholera conquered the world, we must travel to where it was born, the river deltas of India. For centuries, cholera had existed in the Ganges Delta, a local disease, deadly but contained. The bacterium Vibrio cholerae thrived in these warm, brackish waters. It had coexisted with local populations for generations. It was a comma-shaped bacterium, invisible to the naked eye. It lived in water. It killed through water. But in the early 19th century, something changed. The British Empire arrived in force. The British brought roads, railways, and steamships. They connected India to the world as never before. And in 1817, when cholera erupted with unprecedented fury, it had new highways to travel. The first cholera pandemic began in Bengal. Within months, it had swept across India. 10,000 British troops died. Countless Indians perished. The disease boarded ships. It traveled to Burma, Thailand, Indonesia. It reached China and Japan. It was unstoppable. Following trade routes as old as civilization itself, cholera began its march toward Europe. It reached Persia, killing hundreds of thousands. It swept through the Ottoman Empire. It crossed into Russia. In Russia, cholera killed over 100,000 in a single year. The Tsar's empire trembled, but the first pandemic would burn out before reaching Western Europe. The world had received a warning. It did not listen. By 1830, Europe was transforming. The Industrial Revolution was creating cities unlike anything in human history. Millions of people poured from the countryside into the cities. They came seeking work. They found something else. They found housing without sewers, water supplies contaminated by human waste, the perfect conditions for epidemic disease. London's River Thames was an open sewer, yet it was also the city's main source of drinking water, a catastrophe waiting to happen. In 1831, cholera arrived in England. The second pandemic had begun, and Britain was completely unprepared. The port of Sunderland was the first to fall, then Newcastle, then the disease raced south toward London. Those who could flee, fled. The rich escaped to country estates. The poor had nowhere to go. In the slums of London, the dying began. Whole families were wiped out in single days. Doctors tried everything they knew. They bled patients who were already dangerously dehydrated. They administered mercury and opium. Nothing worked. Emergency hospitals opened. They filled immediately. The death rate was staggering. Up to 60% of those infected died. Fear gripped the city. Neighbors stopped helping neighbors. The sick were sometimes abandoned by their own families. Rumors spread that doctors were poisoning the poor, that the rich had created the disease to eliminate the lower classes. Riots erupted. Troops were called out to protect hospitals. The government was losing control. Society itself seemed to be unraveling. The authorities debated endlessly. What was causing the disease? How did it spread? No one knew. The prevailing theory was miasma, bad air, foul smells. They believed the disease arose from rotting matter and poisonous vapors. They burned tar in the streets. They spread chloride of lime. They attacked the smell, but the water remained contaminated. Cholera killed over 50,000 in Britain during the second pandemic. But it was only the beginning. Cholera crossed the Channel. Paris was devastated. Nearly 20,000 died in months. The Prime Minister himself fell victim. The Parisian poor died in such numbers that mass graves had to be dug outside the city walls. Writers like Heinrich Heine documented the horror. He described corpses piled in the streets, their faces still contorted in agony. From Paris, cholera swept across Europe. No major city was spared. The second pandemic killed hundreds of thousands. And then cholera boarded ships bound for America. The New World would offer no refuge. In June 1832, cholera reached New York. America's largest city would face the same terror that had gripped London and Paris. In the slums of Five Points and other immigrant neighborhoods, the disease exploded. 3,000 died in weeks. Americans blamed the immigrants, the Irish, the Germans. They saw cholera as a disease of the dirty and immoral. They were tragically wrong. Cholera traveled up the Mississippi. It followed the rivers deep into the American heartland. No community along the water was safe. Frontier towns with no doctors, no hospitals, no understanding faced the disease alone. Many simply ceased to exist. The second pandemic had proven that no place on earth was safe, but the worst was yet to come. In 1854, cholera returned to London. But this time, someone was watching. Someone who would change history. His name was John Snow, a physician, an anesthesiologist, and an obsessive investigator who refused to accept conventional wisdom. While other doctors blamed bad air, Snow had a radical theory. He believed cholera spread through contaminated water. For years he had gathered evidence, studying outbreaks, mapping cases, building a case that no one wanted to hear. Then, on August 31st, 1854, cholera exploded in the Soho district of London. 500 people would die within 10 days. It was the most intense cholera outbreak London had ever seen. People died so fast that bodies piled up faster than they could be removed. The outbreak would later be traced to a single point: a mother washing her sick baby's diapers, the water draining into a cesspit just feet from the neighborhood well. 3/4 of the residents fled the neighborhood. Those who remained faced almost certain infection. John Snow arrived in Soho, determined to prove his theory. He began the first scientific investigation of an epidemic in history. He went door to door. He recorded every death, every address. He mapped them meticulously, and a pattern emerged. He asked the same question at every home: where do you get your water? The answer was almost always the same: the Broad Street pump, the neighborhood's main water source, the epicenter of the epidemic. Snow's map was revolutionary. Every death clustered around that single pump. The few survivors had drunk water from other sources. He presented his evidence to the Board of Guardians. They were skeptical. The miasma theory was too deeply entrenched. Bad air, not water, they insisted. But Snow persisted. The evidence was overwhelming. Finally, reluctantly, they agreed to a test. On September 8th, 1854, the handle of the Broad Street pump was removed. It was one of the most important moments in the history of medicine. The epidemic was already waning, but the removal of the handle confirmed Snow's theory. Cholera spread through water, not air. Snow published his findings. He had created a new science: epidemiology, the systematic study of disease patterns in populations. But the medical establishment refused to accept his conclusions. The miasma theory was too profitable, too convenient. Snow would die without seeing his ideas accepted. John Snow died in 1858, just 4 years after his Broad Street investigation. He was only 45 years old. Today, a replica of the Broad Street pump stands as a monument. John Snow is remembered as the father of epidemiology, but it took decades for his ideas to triumph. It took the Great Stink of 1858 to finally force change. The Thames became so foul that Parliament itself had to evacuate. Finally, London began building a modern sewer system. Engineer Joseph Bazalgette designed a network of tunnels to carry waste away from the drinking water. It was one of the largest civil engineering projects of the 19th century. 82 miles of main sewers, over 1,000 miles of street sewers. When completed, it would transform London from one of the deadliest cities in Europe to one of the healthiest. The great embankments along the Thames still stand today, monuments to the battle against cholera, hiding the sewers that saved millions of lives. But the true nature of cholera remained hidden until 1883, when German scientist Robert Koch traveled to Egypt to hunt the killer. Koch had already identified the bacteria that caused tuberculosis and anthrax. Now he turned his microscope on cholera. In the intestines of cholera victims, Koch found it, a comma-shaped bacterium, Vibrio cholerae. The invisible killer finally had a face. Koch's discovery proved what John Snow had suspected. Cholera was a living organism, transmitted through contaminated water. The mystery was solved. Now humanity could fight back, not with burning tar and prayers, but with clean water and proper sanitation. Cities across Europe and America began building water treatment plants, filtering and chlorinating their water supplies. By the early 20th century, cholera had been virtually eliminated from the developed world. Clean water had won, a child drinking from a public fountain. Something so simple, yet it represented one of humanity's greatest victories. But in much of the world, cholera continued to kill. Where colonialism extracted wealth but built no sewers, where poverty denied people clean water. India, where cholera originated, continued to suffer devastating outbreaks well into the 20th century, the price of imperial neglect. The final breakthrough came in the 1960s. Oral rehydration therapy, a simple mixture of salt, sugar, and water that could prevent death from dehydration. It was called potentially the most important medical advance of the 20th century. Simple enough for anyone to administer, cheap enough for the poorest nations, yet cholera still kills today. Wherever war, disaster, or poverty destroys water systems, the ancient killer returns. In 2010, cholera struck Haiti for the first time in over a century. Introduced by UN peacekeepers, nearly 10,000 would die. In Yemen, war and blockade created the largest cholera outbreak in recorded history. Over 2 million suspected cases, thousands of deaths. The lesson of cholera has never changed. Clean water saves lives. Contaminated water kills. We have known this for over a century. In wealthy nations, clean water flows from every tap. We take for granted what our ancestors died fighting for. But nearly 1 billion people still lack access to clean water. For them, cholera remains a constant threat. The geography of cholera maps perfectly onto the geography of poverty. The disease is not a mystery. It is a measure of injustice. Scientists continue to develop better vaccines, better treatments, but the ultimate cure is something we have known since Jon Snow. Clean water, proper sanitation. It sounds so simple, yet millions still die for want of it. Every well drilled in a village, every water treatment plant built, every sewer system installed. They are monuments to the victims of cholera, and every child who drinks clean water without fear is a victory over a disease that terrorized humanity for centuries. We must not forget what cholera taught us: the price of ignorance, the cost of inequality, the power of science to save lives. A pub near Broad Street now bears Jon Snow's name. Visitors raise glasses to the man who proved that what we drink can kill us. His methods are now used to track every disease on Earth. Contact tracing, mapping outbreaks. The tools Jon Snow invented in 1854, cholera taught us that diseases do not respect borders. That public health is a collective responsibility, that we are only as safe as the most vulnerable among us. Climate change now threatens to expand cholera's range. Warmer waters, more severe flooding, the conditions the bacterium thrives in. The battle against cholera is not over. It may be entering a new phase. The lessons of the 19th century remain urgently relevant. The United Nations has pledged to provide clean water and sanitation to all by 2030. It is a goal worth every effort. Every year, more people gain access to clean water. The progress is real, but it is not fast enough. When communities gain clean water, everything changes. Children survive. Women have time for education and work. Economies grow. Even in wealthy nations, vigilance is required. Lead in pipes, agricultural runoff. The threats to clean water never fully disappear. Look at how far we have come from cities of death to cities of life, from ignorance to understanding, from helplessness to power. The science Jon Snow founded now trains thousands of epidemiologists every year, ready to face whatever diseases emerge next. We have come so far from the days of bleeding and bad air theories, but we must never become complacent. Beneath every modern city lies infrastructure that previous generations could only dream of, the hidden architecture of survival. We turn on taps without thinking, drink without fear. We have forgotten how miraculous this is, how recently it was impossible. Behind every statistic was a human being, a mother, a child, a worker who drew water from the wrong pump. People are still dying of cholera today, in the 21st century, deaths that are entirely preventable. Every outbreak is a test of our humanity. Will we help? Will we share our knowledge and resources? Or will we look away? Water is life. Clean water is civilization. This is what cholera taught us. This is what we must never forget. The age of cholera is not over, but we have the knowledge and tools to end it forever, if we choose to use them. John Snow showed us that observation, data, and courage can solve mysteries that baffle conventional wisdom. From the slums of Victorian London to the villages gaining clean water today, the story of cholera is the story of human progress itself. 7 pandemics, tens of millions dead, a century of terror. Cholera taught humanity that public health is the foundation of civilization, that clean water is a human right, and that science, when given the chance, can save us all.